Welcome into the PFN Bengals Podcast. I am Dallas Robinson. He is Jay Morrison. Jay, we've got the final Bengals preseason game coming up here later this week. We're going to go into our 53-man roster projection here in a little bit and talk who's last in, who's last out at every spot on this roster. But I think before we get into that, Jay, we've got to talk about the joint practice the Bengals conducted with Indianapolis Colts. You were there. You were on the scene. What did you see between the Bengals, the Colts, that you liked, that you didn't like? What were your main takeaways from the joint practice this week?
Yeah, my main takeaway, it was really well behaved. There was not a lot of, there was some chirping going on, but it never really got physical. At least, there was two fields. I watched the Bengals defense against the Colts offense. I think everybody else in Cincinnati was watching Joe Burrow against the Colts defense. I've seen enough of Joe Burrow. I know where this thing stands. He looks great. So I wanted to watch the defense, and I was interested in Anthony Richardson too. And so I was over there, and that was my other takeaway is that, yes, Anthony Richardson he's got 4 games under his belt. He's still got some growing to do. The Bengals defense just looks great. They're ready for this season. And Dax Hill, this is his job. It's clear. Even though DJ Turner started that game against the Buccaneers, the long run that Dax got and how well Dax performed in that game, I think that was kind of the turning point. And we've ever since then, practice, preseason game, joint practice, whatever it's been Dax Hill running with the ones, and the rotation's gone. DJ Turner has not been in there with the ones. And sometimes in the dime package when they bring in 5 defensive backs, he's in there. But yeah, this is and it was another good day for Dax yesterday. He had the last play in 11s before they did the real quick one-on-one drill or the 1-minute drill. He had a pass breakup in the end zone on a pass from Anthony Richardson. And then early in practice, Anthony Richardson was really going after him, and his Anthony Richardson's first 3 incompletions were targeted towards Dax Hill. He had the coverage. He had one where he gave up the catch technically on the sideline, but there was officials at practice. They ruled the receiver out of bounds, so it was another pass. It was a pass defense. He didn't get his hands on the ball, but it was another not incomplete pass that in Dax's direction. So he looks good. Von Bell, I think, looks like he's found the fountain of youth. I was kind of wondering if he was just kind of a placeholder and he was going to get everybody settled, and then Jordan Battle was going to take over this spot. I think Von Bell's he's going to have a lot to say about holding off Jordan Battle this year. He looks really strong and good. And BJ Hill just in the middle. And he took exception when I asked him about people think of him as a pass rusher. Has he been working on his run defense? And he's like, I don't understand why people don't think I can defend the run. And he did it again the last 2 days. He's been very active in the backfield and stop and run. So just a lot to like about what you've seen from this defense. And I guess, we should mention that the one thing that you didn't like was seeing Myles Murphy go down. But it sounds like it's not serious. It kind of looked like it wasn't serious when they let him kind of limp off the field and go. The cart was way at the other end, and he walked over there. It was usually, if it's a really bad injury, the cart comes onto the field, picks you up, and takes you off. So just letting him kind of walk it off a little bit gave you the sense that maybe it wasn't that serious.
Yeah, and we've got reports from James Rapien and from Mike Ruffalo at NFL Network that it's not very serious, that Myles Murphy is thankfully just going to miss a couple of weeks, it sounds like. Myles Murphy's brother, Max, tweeted out that he has a sprained MCL. Take that with a grain of salt, obviously, but it seems like good news is that it seems like it's not going to be a long-lasting injury for Myles Murphy. On the defense, I think it's very good news to hear, I think, especially after the second team defense played so well for the most part against the Bears in the preseason game. I think not just the top line starters, but the depth pieces that you're feeling much better about than Lou Anarumo probably felt when he looked at this roster last year when they were giving up explosive plays and giving out constant yardage in the run game. I think at almost every level, you feel better about the depth. Dax Hill, man, it's incredibly, incredibly impressive. I think what he's done over this summer to go from a guy who's playing, slot corner and safety in college, transitioning into the NFL, not playing at all during his rookie year, position switch in year 2, and another position switch in year 3 to play outside corner, a position he's never really played at any really level for any amount of time. It's an incredibly impressive, I think, summer for him to come in and grab that job from DJ Turner, who was the incumbent coming into training camp. I don't think you can say enough about what Dax Hill has done. but also you feel good about having DJ Turner is that cornerback 3/4 who can come in
Yeah.
if there's an injury somewhere else. So I think from that perspective, top to bottom, you feel much better about where this defense stands than you did at the end of last season.
Yeah. And just, the communication aspect of it, you hear them in a practice talking and getting guys aligned. And it was chaotic last year in training camp. There's no other way around it. And this year it's not. There might be a single thing said, outside the huddle to get somebody lined up or shifted a little bit, but they're doing a lot of just different interesting things. And there was a play yesterday where Dax Hill and Von Bell switched. And Vaughn came up on the line of scrimmage and was guarding a receiver, and Dax dropped all the way back and was part of a 2-high safety with Geno Stone. And just that kind of flexibility and everybody understanding, even, the rookies, Josh Newton and Daijahn Anthony, feel comfortable. They feel like they know what this defense is and this scheme is. And that, I think a lot of that is Von Bell, being that coach on the field and just bringing the stability back to this defense. So you get that back end of it settled. That changes everything right there. And then, if you can get Myles Murphy back and Joseph Osai and be, really quality backup edge rushers, and now Sheldon Rankins and BJ Hill, and you get the push up the middle, just pairing that rush and cover aspect of defense. I think this defense is in for a considerable leap this year in their rankings.
That communication was so key back when Jesse Bates and Von Bell were starting in the back end for Lou a couple years ago. And I don't know that they'll get back to that point with Geno Stone and Von Bell, but I think it'll be closer than it was last season with Nick Scott and Dax Hill playing in the back. And we know Lou Anarumo likes to play all sorts of coverages. And just like you mentioned with that play there, do all sorts of creative and flexible things. You've got to have guys with the experience and the talent to do both of those things. I think they're much closer now with Von Bell, with Geno Stone, than they were last year with Nick Scott and the other groups they had playing safety. It's much better from that perspective. Jay, anything else from yesterday's joint practice that you noticed before we kind of dive into our projections here? Anything else on? I know you're watching mostly the defensive side of the ball. Anybody else that stood out to you from yesterday's practice before we get into our projections?
Well, I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, but maybe the money's getting to Evan McPherson. The report came out last week, and they finished both these joint practices with a 1-minute drill. And in Chicago in the rain, they drive in. Logan Woodside drives the twos into field goal position, and Evan McPherson comes out and tries like a 55-yarder, hits the upright, no good. Yesterday, I've not seen him miss one. I don't know if it was an issue with the hold or what it was, but he hooked it way left. So it's funny, that guy's going to be fine, but it's just jarring to see a miss like that. And then the Colts did the same thing. They moved right down the field, got in field goal range, and their kicker missed it. So maybe it was windy yesterday, but one missed left, one missed right. So I don't know if you can blame that on the wind or not. But it was just an interesting way to end both of these last two joint practices for the Bengals offense and special teams.
Matt Gay, a Colts kicker, he's a very highly paid kicker too. So maybe it's the money's getting to these guys. Who knows? Okay, we're gonna dive into our 53-man roster projection here. The way we're gonna do this is just go position by position, talk about our locks, and then talk about the last guy in and the last guy out at each spot. It's Jerry. I don't know about you, but I had a decent amount of locks. It's those last few spots I think that are really, really challenging to kind of identify who's going to make this roster. But overall takeaways as you were going through this depth chart that the Bengals have, for me, I kind of mentioned with the defense, but just improved depth everywhere. I really do feel like they've gotten younger and have more depth options at several different positions than they did last year. I think we'll talk about that when we get to the offensive line, especially that there's just some younger, interesting options, I think, on this roster than they had last year they're going to play maybe a significant amount of snaps and help this roster get a little more explosive, a little more deep at certain areas.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about the depth, and I agree with you. It's good, but then also the reason that there are so many locks when you look at this 53-man roster is, spot 54 down to what are they at 80? The roster's at 86 now. There's not a lot of competition there. This does feel like a very cut and dry 53-man roster. There's a couple spots that you could see going one way or another, and then the ripple effect where if they go heavy at one spot, which spot do they go light at? But yeah, I do think that this team is poised to be able to handle any injury that might come along, as long as it's not a season ender. They've got the depth pieces in place. They've got guys, look at that linebacker room and how long all those guys have been around. It's just they've built a nice roster. That said, a lot of those rookies are going to make this team, and you just don't see that. 7th rounders, 6th rounders, 5th rounders. Josh Newton. I mean, those guys are pretty close to locks. They had a great draft. They had a great offseason with all the free agent pieces they brought in. I think they are positioned really, really well. And then, you got the wild card out there with Jamar Chase. Expect him to play. Expect him to be there for the opener. But again, just the overall depth from 1 to 53, this team stacks up really well. You got the top end talent. You've got the depth. You've got the continuity. No excuses this year not to make a run.
Let's start with quarterback. I think the skill positions on this team are fairly easy to determine. At quarterback, it's pretty easy. It's Joe Burrow, it's Jake Browning. I guess the only question here is Jake Browning's rib issue, right? And does that linger? Does that linger into the regular season? I guess there's a possibility where they could put Browning on IR and keep Logan Woodside as their second quarterback for 4 games, but I don't know. That's totally speculation. I think if anything, they could maybe use Woodside as their backup quarterback, like from the practice squad, if they had to for a couple games, promote him for a couple games while Browning is on the roster, kind of recovering. But for now, I think I'm expecting Browning to be back by week 1 and kind of assume his usual backup quarterback spot behind Joe Burrow.
Yeah, I asked Zach about this the other day, and he said if it was an important game that meant something to their season, that absolutely Browning could go out there and play. But he said it's also a case where this is an injury where the best thing for it is rest, and that's the tack they're going to take. So, I fully expect him to be on the 53. There's no restrictions in practice, so even if they want to keep Browning on the sideline in practice when the regular season gets here to further rest that rib injury, then Logan Woodside can take all the second team reps. And there's not a lot of those once you get into the regular season anyhow. So yeah, this is pretty cut and dry. Maybe one of the 2 most cut and dry positions on the team.
Running back. Who do you have making the team here? I feel like this one's basically cut and dry as well.
It is. Zach Moss, Chase Brown, Travion Williams. I don't even know, because we were going to talk about here what's the last position in each group and what's that battle. It's like I don't even know who would it be. Noah Cain or would it be Elijah Collins against Travion? I think it's moot. We have barely seen Cain and Collins. They none of those guys have even kind of moved up into second team reps, and part of that comes from the fact that you've got a 1A and a 1B in Moss and Brown, and they've gotten Travion a lot of work. So I would imagine they'll keep at least one of them on the practice squad, but this is another position. This is the position I was looking at next to quarterback, where it's just totally cut and dry. We know what this is going to look like. Moss, Brown, and Williams are all going to be on the 53, and then the other 2 guys, we'll see if they come back, one or both, on the practice squad.
Any chance they try and pick up somebody off waivers or a free agent, do you think, to replace Williams? I mean, we've mentioned Samaje Perine a million times on the show. I think he'll be cut by Denver. Other guys I think that could be cut: Israel Abakanda from the Jets, Michael Carter from the Cardinals, Isaiah Spiller from the Chargers. These guys are like mid-round picks in the past couple drafts that have a little bit of experience. I do wonder if the Bengals will be in a market for an alternate third running back at cutdowns, but they know Travion. They like Travion. They obviously have a role for Travion, and they like what he can do, on special teams and as a backup, third down back. It's familiarity at this point, at this time of year, right? For a third down back, I'm not sure if you want to bring somebody else in who doesn't know the system. That's why Perine, I think, is maybe that one possibility who's still out there that could be a fit. But I'm right there with you. Brown, Moss, Williams. It looks like that's the group for week 1.
Yeah, even if they went and got a Perine, then the corresponding move may not be Travion Williams. Probably wouldn't be Travion Williams. It would go light somewhere else. I think Travion is safe. He's going to be one of the 2 kick returners, it looks like. Yeah. And so, that, and just that, like you said, the familiarity, and he does have a third down role. I think that'll be reduced this year with Chase Brown, but yeah, I'd be surprised if he's not on this team all year.
Wide receiver, another one that's fairly cut and dry, I would say. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Andre Yoshivas, Trenton Irwin, Jermaine Burton, Charlie Jones. That's my six. Um, let's see, is that your six as well? I'm assuming that we're the 6 for 6 on that, unless there's a surprising change from you, Jay.
No, that is my six. I think the surprise here is if I'm saying the final spot, I think it's Jermaine Burton versus Kendrick Pryor. It's not really a battle. They're going to keep Burton. He's a 3rd round pick, but he's, we're just not seeing him get any first team reps, and he's really kind of slid down the depth chart there. And now Charlie Jones is back and participating in team drills, and Trenton Irwin has been reliable this whole time here. So I think Burton's that wide receiver 6 right now. And Kendrick Pryor hurt his finger. He hasn't practiced the last 2 days. He's no real threat to beat him out for that final spot. But I do think it's notable that Burton, we had talked about earlier, maybe being wide receiver 3, and I've got him at wide receiver 6 right now.
No, I've got him there as well. And maybe we'll see, continuing with the return game like he did on punts and kicks. I think that's a way that you can get the ball in his hands. But I agree with you. I think if anything, we're going to see a wide receiver 3 rotation between Yoshivas and Irwin and maybe some of the tight ends. But seems like Burton is pretty far down the depth chart there. What is your most recent take, Jay, on the Jamar Chase situation? Like, where do we stand with this? Is this going to be a situation where he just suits up for week 1 and we pretend like this never happened? I mean, that's kind of where I'm leaning at this point. I understand where he's coming from and wanting a new contract, but other guys entering year 4 at wide receiver have typically waited until the following offseason before they've gotten extension. We've gone through all the kind of ripple effects of the Justin Jefferson extension and where that leaves Jamar Chase. How do you see these next few weeks playing out before the regular season, like with Jamar Chase? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, he's going to come back to practice at some point, I would think. Probably that, not next week, but the following week after Labor Day, that the game week for the Patriots. There's just, I think, part of it is him making a statement right now that he's not happy. I think part of it is just protecting his body and not taking any risk on getting injured. But you think about it, last year when Burrow went through this, not a peep coming from either camp. And, they knew it was going to get done, and there was kind of an agreement on both sides. It's been the same with Chase. You look at these other receivers, CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk, and they're voicing their displeasure, and Chase hasn't done that. It's not got to that public sparring yet. It just feels like this is all kind of an orchestrated thing where, even Zach being unwilling to talk about it, you would think at some point some frustration, he would even say something, look, obviously we're better with Jamar practicing, but he's not practicing right now, but he's refused to address it at all, really. And it just feels like, let Jamar do his thing, make his statement, protect his body, whatever it is. But when it comes time to play games, he's going to be out there. He's got nothing to gain by sitting out, because first of all, it's hard enough to win a staring contest with Mike Brown. Second of all, you look at the way that schedule lines up, they're going to go 3-1, even if Jamar Chase doesn't play, you would think. And so all of a sudden you sit out 2-4 games, whatever it is, and the team doesn't suffer, you lose more leverage there. And just the lack of leverage he has anyhow with him having 2 years left on the deal. I think it's he's putting a statement out. It's kind of like the Trey Hendrickson trade request. It wasn't a really serious thing. He's just putting it out there, letting people know that he feels like he's underpaid. Jamar wants people to know that he feels like he's underpaid. He's going to get paid. It's just going to be next year.
Personally, I don't have like a huge problem with it. I think if a superstar wants to protect his body and get ready for the regular season, like I have faith that Jamar Chase knows what he needs to do to get ready for week 1. You hear that all the time with it. Like the San Francisco 49ers, we just mentioned with Ayuk, they're not that worried about a guy like Trent Williams sitting out, multiple weeks. Like they know he's going to be ready. With these superstar players, they're going to be ready. And it feels to me like there's maybe an unspoken agreement, right, between Zach Taylor and Jamar Chase. Like that's fine. You don't want to practice, that's fine. You're here, you're showing up, you're in the meetings, that's fine. As long as you're ready for week 1, then we're good. And again, I don't see a huge problem with that. You're right. It hasn't gotten out of hand like the CD situation, like the Ayuk situation. It's all being kind of handled in-house, which is a lot of how the Bengals like to do their business. So I'm right there with you. I'd be surprised if we're still talking about this by the time week 1 rolls around. Let's move on to tight end. I've got 4 tight ends here. Now, I know that I'm leaving off a certain rookie here, and we can get into this, but I'm keeping Mike Gesicki, Drew Sample, Tanner Hudson, Eric All. I do think Tanner McLaughlin is right there in the mix if the Bengals want to keep 5 tight ends. I just not sure if they're going to, based on what they've done with their roster in the past, how many tight ends they've kept. I don't think they've ever kept 5 tight ends, Jay, at least based on the spreadsheet that you keep with rosters year by year. I mean, I've seen a couple years with 4, but even that was at the beginning of the Zach Taylor tenure. I don't think they've ever kept 5 tight ends. So I think with that history in mind, I think the Bengals will waive Tanner McLaughlin. Hope that he gets through to the practice squad, and they'll go with that group of 4 that I mentioned.
Yeah, 2017 they kept 4 tight ends, and then Ryan Hewitt was listed as a fullback. He's kind of a tight end / fullback, so that was as close as they came. But I'm with you; it's going to be 4. Where I've seen movement here is I've got Eric All at tight end 3 now, and Tanner Hudson tight end 4. So that's where the battle would be: Tanner Hudson versus Tanner McLaughlin. But you look at these guys. Gesicki is basically a slot receiver. He is not a known blocking tight end. Drew Sample's the opposite. He's here as a blocker. He is not a real threat as a pass catcher. Tanner Hudson is in the Gesicki mold. He's dynamic. He catches ball. He's not a great blocker. Eric All can do it both. And we've seen it, and they're working him more and more into the plan as he's come back from the ACL injury. He's taking a lot of first team reps, and he's in there on blocking plays. They're running a lot more 12 personnel. I really think they like who he is as a blocker, and then that dynamic where you line up in 12 and the defense gets in base and is expecting a run, and then all of a sudden you can run Eric All up the seam and maybe exploit that. So I see him ticking up the depth chart, the rookie from my alma mater, Fairfield High. So I just screwed up my own alma mater.
Oh, come on.
Fairfield High School. We'll edit that out later.
Yeah, we'll edit that in post. No, I agree. And the thing is, Mike Gesicki, I think, is going to have a real role this year. I'm a huge fan of Tanner Hudson, but these guys are on 1-year deals. I think Eric All will continue to move up that depth chart. And then 2025, I mean, there's no reason he cannot be the tight end 1 on this roster and be a significant part of what this passing offense looks like next year. I'm right there with you. We'll probably get into it in future shows, but I'm just so curious about the differences that this offense is going to have next year, and whether it does have more 12 personnel and different personnel groupings and more under center. And I think Eric All is going to be a big part of what those formational alignments and those different looks look like. I really do. So I think he's like a key piece of what this roster looks like going forward. Offensive line, Jay, what do you have here? Sometimes the Bengals keep 9, sometimes they keep 10. We've got, the Amarius Mims pectoral injury to discuss and how that factors into the rotation. Who do you have for offensive line on this 53-man roster projection?
Yeah, I've got 9. So I've got the 5 starters at the moment with Orlando Brown, Trent Brown, Cordell Volson, Alex Kappa, Ted Karras, obviously Mims. And then the backups, I've got Cody Ford, Jackson Kirkland, and Matt Lee. And I think that is the final spot, the final battle, Matt Lee versus Trey Hill. And just as is the case with Dax Hill, we've seen the proof. I mean, Matt Lee played the entire game at center against Chicago, and he has replaced Trey Hill as the number 2 center in practice, and Trey Hill's moved over to guard. If they go 10, then I think maybe Trey Hill does make it. But I think we've seen the last of Jackson Carman. Well, I shouldn't say the last, because they could bring him back on the practice squad, but his reps have dwindled to next to nothing. I think that speaks volumes. And they like what they've seen from Matt Lee. So I do. I think he's nudged ahead of Trey Hill as that backup center to Ted Karras. And I think going 9 here, you have Cody Ford's versatility as tackle guard. Jackson Kirkland has been working. He played tackle in college. He's been playing tackle and guard now in camp for the last couple of weeks. So I think that that versatility allows you to go lighter here and keep an extra defensive back.
I've got the same 9 as you. So we've got the same exact offense projection then. I think we've got the same exact group here. I think the Bengals, starting Jackson Kirkland at left tackle, they were trying to tell us something in the preseason game that he is going to be one of their top options. I'm with you on Jackson Carman. I wanted to hold out hope that he could potentially make this roster, but it's just been so bad. The signs are all there. I think if the Bengals cut Jackson Carman, I actually don't think he'll come back on the practice squad. Not because the Bengals wouldn't want him to, but I don't think he would want to. Yeah. I think if you're a second round pick who's kind of, I don't want to say like been treated poorly because it's mostly based on his performance, but who's been through what he's been through with the Bengals, the position switch, the struggles, the benchings, the kind of embarrassed. I think that's where you kind of maybe want to get a fresh start. So I would think that he would not come back to this practice squad. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think the Mims injury makes things a little bit interesting, right? We don't know exactly how long he's going to be out, but I'm with you that I think that probably does push Trent Brown into the starting lineup at right tackle. That if as good as Mims has looked in practice and training camp, and I think that he'd be fine as the starting right tackle, but if he's going to miss this time here right before the season, I think going with a veteran who's started close to 100 games and Trent Brown is probably the way the Bengals are going to go. And then, yeah, Matt Lee, I think he's just shown at every turn that he deserves to make this roster over Trey Hill. I don't know what argument you can make for Trey Hill that doesn't just go with experience, right? That he has more time on the team. Everything else gives you to Matt Lee. Ted Karras said he'd be happy if he was a Bengals fan to have a guy like Matt Lee in the pipeline, right? I think this is your future center. I might even put Nate Gilliam ahead of Trey Hill, honestly. I think Nate Gilliam has shown a little bit. He got the start last week. Trey Hill had two? Did he have 2 or 3 penalties? I can't remember. I can't remember.
3.
And Carman had 3 the week before, right? So it's like the double trifecta there. If anything, if the Bengals want to add another offensive lineman, if something happens with Mims, if he's injured, if they don't feel good about their depth, the only guy out there really is Dennis Daly. Just got cut by the Cardinals. He's a veteran. He's got 37 career starts. I wonder if Bengals want a little more depth, a little more versatility. He can play guard too. But I think that these are the 9. These are the 9 that I have as well. And maybe you try and sneak Trey Hill and Nate Gilliam onto the practice squad, and then you've got a little more interior depth. You try and sneak Devin Cochran, you got a little more tackle depth. But I agree with you. I think these are the 9 that they're going to roll with.
Yeah, and it's a good point about Carman, because Frank Pollock mentioned that last week when we talked to him, where he's going through some things, and it's tough to be a high pick and a hometown kid. And I think a fresh start would do him good. But for him, maybe it lights a fire under him. You see, this is my last shot. I think 4 years, the Bengals have seen enough. They might be interested in bringing back on the practice squad just because he knows the system and he's been here. But I think it's a good point that you make, where if they cut him from the 53, which we expect him to do, he may just look for options on a practice squad elsewhere.
Let's go to defense. Defensive line. I've got 10 guys. I've got 5 edge, 5 defensive tackles. Edge guys, I've got Hendrickson, Hubbard, Murphy, assuming he's okay, Osai, and then the rookie Cedric Johnson, now that Jeff Gunter has retired. Defensive tackle, Rankins, Hill, Jenkins, and Jackson, the 2 rookies. And then I've got Zach Carter still making the team.
Yeah.
I think he's done enough through these couple preseason games. I think he's the last guy to make it. Last guy off, I think, would be Jay Tufele for me. After that, I'm not sure if a lot of the other guys really have a good chance at making this roster. I think for me, Tufele, just having been here, knows the system, flashed a little bit last season, I think, on the interior, but I think a former 3rd-round pick like Zach Carter is going to make this roster. You're not cutting 2 rookies. So I think if you're going with 10, those are the guys I'm projecting.
Yeah, I had that last spot down to Cedric Johnson and Jay Tufele, mainly because not so much that Tufele's been here and knows the scheme, but you don't have a true nose guard, a true run stopper with McKinley Jackson hurt, and we don't know how long that injury is going to be. And Tufele had a sack yesterday. it was with the 3s, but he missed some time in camp. He missed a little more than 2 weeks, but he's back now, and I've had multiple coaches refer to him as just a gamer. And he doesn't always show up in practice, but he makes plays in games when he's called on. They trust him, and just being in that position as a guy that they don't have that similar nose tackle. I think there's a shot they could go with him and roll the dice that Cedric Johnson could make it back through to the practice squad. The other issue there is, maybe they put McKinley Jackson on IR. There's new rules now, and you can put 2 guys on IR and still before the 53 and then still be able to bring them back at some point during the season. And McKinley Jackson would be a prime candidate for that. And then maybe you can keep Johnson and Tufele. But, if we take the IR variable out of the mix, then I've still got it with Cedric Johnson, but I think there's a real shot that they could go Tufele because they need that big body in the middle.
I think that's a really good point that Jackson could go on IR and just stash him for a little bit. It's not like he's probably going to see a huge amount of snaps from the get go, even if he's fully healthy. He's the 4th, 5th defensive tackle. So I think if he's dealing with that injury still, first year in the NFL, get him a little bit of time to recover and then maybe come back week 5 or something like that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I really do. If they want to keep Tufele. Okay. Give me your linebacker group. I think we know the top 3 for sure. Who do you have? There's depth pieces at linebacker.
Yeah, the 4 long timers: Logan Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Joe Bocci, and Akeem Davis Gaither. For the 5th spot, I've got Maema Njongmeta. He's been so impressive, and
he's undeniable.
That last spot between him and Devin Harper, I've been leaning Harper all along just because of the trust Darren Simmons has in him on special teams. But we've seen them put Maema in, and played quite a bit on special teams against the Bears. I caught up with him in the locker room the other day, and I said, how much special teams did you play at Wisconsin? He said none. So this is all so new to him, and he's still holding his own. And he's a really impressive guy to talk to. When I talked to the linebackers coach, James Betcher, he's like, if we're going to talk about him, we have to start with his preparation. And he's like, it's so impressive for a young guy, the way he's approached this. And Maema said, yeah, that was something that he didn't have in college either. He just relied totally on athleticism, and he's kind of learned to move into this role. So this is a guy, he's been impressive, and he just seems like he's ascending in all the right areas. And I think we're going to see it. I think we're going to see the undrafted kid make the 53.
I mean, how could he not at this point? I mean, he has to. I agree that Devin Harper's got the experience, but Njongmeta has been so impressive. Just the tenacity he plays with, right? I think you love that on special teams as a backup linebacker. Robert Mays from The Athletic has talked about on his training camp tours that the number one thing he's heard from defensive coaches is not so much scheme changes, but like what does it feel like when we play on defense? What is the tenacity and the effort level we bring? Njongmeta is obviously not going to be a starter on defense, but I do think the Bengals could use a little more of that fire on defense, right? A little more of that aggression, that attitude on defense. Njongmeta is, not going to be in the starting lineup. He's going to be a depth piece. He'll be on special teams, but gotta love that attitude. I think from a rookie, that fire that he plays with. Sometimes I think in the preseason, it's come back to hurt him, right? When he's trying to catch guys in space or something like that. He's not the fastest in space, but moving downhill, that's a guy that I like at linebacker a lot. And I think that's the type of guy Darren Simmons wants playing on special teams. Yeah,
I mean, that same grit and fierceness that plays on special teams too. It doesn't just play on defense. I think he will have a role there.
Let's go to cornerback. I have 6 cornerbacks making the roster. Cam Taylor-Britt, Dax Hill, Mike Hilton is your starting nickel package. DJ Turner and Josh Newton is your backup outside corners. And I've got Jalen Davis making the roster. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure who else the Bengals would be comfortable with as their backup slot corner if something happened to Mike Hilton. Now, Mike Hilton getting a little older. You don't ever want to project in injuries, but you want to have depth at that spot. Would they trust DJ Turner in the nickel? Maybe. Could Josh Newton play the nickel? Maybe. But we know Jalen Davis has played in there. We know he can handle the interior. It was one of the toughest decisions, and I think we'll get into it when we get into safety on where these last few spots came in. But I do think the Bengals will want someone they can count on to play behind Hilton. And if they're not sure Turner or Newton can do that, then I have Davis making the roster as the 6th cornerback.
Yeah, I have him making it too, but it's more on special teams that I did it.
Okay.
The last few practices, they've had Josh Newton in the slot with the 2s, and they put Jalen Davis out wide. Now, I don't know if it's just trying to get the rookie some reps in there, or if they see him as a better fit as a slot than Jalen Davis at this point. But Jalen Davis played a lot of special teams last year, and he's the vice on punt return. He's been a gunner before on punt coverage. Last year Yoshivas did that, and he's going to have a bigger role as a receiver this year. So I think they're going to be looking for another gunner, and maybe it's DJ Turner. But I just think there's a lot of trust there with Jalen Davis and what he can do on special teams. He's been here for a long time, and he's the reason I went 9 on offensive line just so I could keep 6 cornerbacks. Maybe the Bengals see it the same way.
So I've got DJ Ivy staying on the pup list, I think, at least for the first half of the season. Who was like your last guy out? I mean, I guess Alan George played what, 90% of the snaps in the preseason.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess he would be the next guy up. You've got Nate Brooks and Lance Robinson. I don't think any of those guys are truly in the mix. I think it feels pretty obvious for the 6 cornerbacks for the Bengals.
Yeah, Lance got hurt in the Chicago game. He's been walking around in a sling, and Alan George, again, a guy that's been here for a couple of years on the practice squad as a UDFA guy from Vanderbilt. Lots to like about him. Felt bad for him. He dropped the easiest interception I've ever seen. I mean, Anthony Richardson threw it right to him in the end zone yesterday. He dropped it. He was getting so much grief from his teammates, but it was still a pass breakup, and it was the final play of that period. But still, it was like, oh, you could have had a big splash play. But yeah, he's a guy that even if he doesn't make the team, that he's going to be here on the practice squad. Yes. They like him a lot.
So I guess we're going to have the same 53 then, based on everything that we've had so far.
Yeah.
So not
like
exactly
we said, it's pretty cut and dry.
It is. So who do you have at safety then? I think we can guess, but give me your safety group.
Yeah, Gino, Vaughn are the starters, then Battle, Daijahn Anthony, the rookie, and Tyson Anderson. Tyson just really good on special teams. Darren said he was on the way to being a Pro Bowl special teamer last year before he tore his ACL. He's still only like a week beyond 9 months. They didn't play him in the Tampa Bay game, but he did get in and play against Chicago. So he's on his way. He's back. I just think we've not really seen him do much from a defensive standpoint. He lost basically his rookie year to a hamstring injury, didn't play at all. And then last year, everything he did was on special teams. But I still think that's valuable enough. He's that good at that role that he'll make this 53.
Agreed. Yeah, I think this is the most improved position group on the Bengals by far from 2023 to 2024. It should be much, much, much better than it was last season from communication, from talent, from depth, from every standpoint. I've got the same 5 guys. Special teams, McPherson, Robbins, Adamitis. Yeah, it just feels like that's the default at this point. Hunter Recco did not have a great game against the Bears. McNamara is no longer on the roster. Robbins, I guess, wins by default.
Yeah, we'll see what the timeline is on his injury. He's been willing to talk about it. Yesterday, when the special teams were on the field, we were watching, and they ran to the backfield behind us, and he was kind of like jogging behind me. He's like, "Look at me, look how good I'm moving." And I think he feels really good about where he's at. And we're not going to see him punt against the Colts on Thursday, but I fully expect him to be the opening day starter. And if he's not, that creates an interesting dynamic. If he's not ready physically and you keep Rico, it's hard to keep 2 punters on the 53, but do you risk having Robbins get plucked by somebody? I don't think it's that big of a risk. I don't know there's that many teams out there desperate for another punter. So I think you would probably be safe to bring him back on the practice squad, but they may not even take that risk. I think that, you're going to see him be able to go in the opener and be on the 53.
When I was doing this projection, I said I think I had 51 guys I felt good about, like really, really good about. And then I was kind of deciding for those last 2 spots between Jalen Davis, Daijahn Anthony, Trey Hill, and Nate Gilliam. And I eventually went with the 2 defensive backs. And I think there's still a chance that the Bengals could go with 10 offensive linemen, and that would have the ripple effects down throughout the roster. But I really, as long as Mims is okay and available as at least a bench option, I really do feel like Mims, Ford, Kirkland, and Matt Lee is a really solid bench offensive line, and it gives you options at multiple positions, gives you upside, gives you depth. So I'm okay with that respect, going with 9 and slotting in Davis and Anthony onto this roster. And like we said at the top, I feel like this is one of the NFL's best rosters. Just no doubt about it. From top to bottom, they've got high-end talent with Burrow and Chase and Higgins and Hendrickson and guys like that, but depth at basically every spot where I don't feel as though there's a glaring weakness on one of these teams, on one of these positions. I really don't. Throughout, I think free agency, throughout the draft, the Bengals did a really good of filling in their gaps that they did have going into the offseason. And there's just not a spot anymore on this roster. Maybe defensive tackle, you could say, is the one spot where you'd like to have another body. But even there, you drafted 2 mid-round defensive tackles that you're hoping are going to progress this year. So top to bottom, I just think that this is not a roster where you have like that blinking red light of, oh my God, this spot is going to kill us this year.
Yeah, my only iffy question mark is Jalen Davis. Do they go 6 corners? But I mean, I think Daijahn Anthony is a lock, and even as well as he's played with the twos and in the preseason, he's been repping in with the ones when they go to that dime package. I mean, they like him a lot, and he's just a player, and he's a guy that's just outperformed who you thought he was at every single level. So I think he's a lock. I've got him as my safety 4 and Tyson as my safety 5. So that, like I said, Jalen Davis is the only one. Do they want to go 6 corners? And let's look at my trusty sheet here right now. Yeah, they've gone at least 6 corners each of the last 4 years. So yeah. I don't think that's a stretch. Now they were thinner on safety, those years, but I think that's it. Is it a 10th offensive lineman or is it Jalen Davis? And I think Jalen Davis gives you more in the current because of his special teams availability than just a contingency plan as a 10th offensive lineman.
So tomorrow we've got the Bengals' final preseason game. Jack Taylor said maybe a few starters, but not really expecting too much to be gained there, too much to be learned.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're watching for in this final preseason game, or as we kind of go into this final weekend? Roster cutdowns are next week, so the Bengals will have to make their final decisions. Any other overarching points on this roster that you're kind of looking for as the Bengals make their final decisions?
No, what I'm interested most is who are those maybe starters tomorrow night, and I think you could see Dax Hill in there for like one last tune-up. Because the Colts are planning on playing Anthony Richardson in their starters. So get him in there for a series or 2, one more live look at him. I wonder about Zach Moss. We haven't seen him. He was sick for the Tampa Bay game when all the other starters played. So maybe they get him in just to shake some rust off. Other than that, I don't know who those starters might be that they're considering playing. It's sure not going to be Joe Burrow, not behind that offensive line the way it stands right now, because I don't think you would risk playing Trent Brown. So then you're talking about, one of those Cody Ford or Jackson Kirkland at right tackle. I don't think they want to take that chance. But I am interested to see, and I want to see, again, is it going to be Jermaine Burton returning kicks and returning punts? Was that just kind of a one-time experiment, or are we going to see some more of that? And Charlie Jones isn't a starter, but I wonder if we'll see him. He's finally worked his way back in. He's doing 11s. It's he's another one of those guys that had a knee injury at first you weren't sure about and ended up not being that serious. You're hoping that Myles Murphy's timeline looks like Charlie Jones did. So beyond that, I don't know. There's just not a lot of intrigue. I guess Muma will be fun to watch, knowing that he's
of course,
he's playing for that spot. I think he's got it, but that's what he said when I talked to him. I just I thanked him. I said, it's been a lot of fun to watch you, and he's like, I haven't done anything yet. And I was like, well, that quote's going in the story for sure, right there. It's a good mindset to have. He's done a lot. I think he's done enough, but for him to not feel like he has, that's a good way to approach it.
No, absolutely. For me, I'm easy. Give me the skill position, guys. I want to see more Jermaine Burton. I want to see more Eric All. Like that's who I want to see. I want to see those guys, and of course, Njongmeta. Like we know he's going to make a play. He's a preseason superstar at this point. Last thing, Paul Daner, Mark Chalifo, tomorrow night, 4 p.m. Bet MGM Nation Kitchen, pregame show, trivia, maybe some prizes, some food,
a lot of
some
prizes.
drinks. It sounds like a great time. Like it sounds like it's going to be a really fun time. Anybody who can make it down, make sure you go down there before the Bengals preseason game and hang out with Jay, Paul, and Mark. I mean, it's. I wish I was going to be there. It sounds great.
$3 Cincy Lights, $6 nachos, nacho trays. So it's a lot of fun. The Green Day and Smashing Pumpkins concert is going to be right across the street, so it's going to be great people watching. Really looking forward to it. With the last show we did, the live show was a lot of fun. And we have a lot of prizes to give away. If you come down to the show and you don't walk away with something for free, something went wrong.
So if there was no Bengals game, you would be at that concert, right? I mean, there's just are that Green Day and Smashing Pumpkins? I'm assuming that's that's on your list. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lukewarm on Smashing Pumpkins. I've seen Green Day before. I have seen them in concert. I like them. It wouldn't be top of my list, but you put any band out there live, I'm in the mix.
Of course. All right. Well, anybody who can make it down, make sure you join Jay, Mark, and Paul tomorrow night. That'll be a lot of fun. Enjoy the game tomorrow. Make sure you watch these back end roster guys, and we will be back next week to recap this game, to probably give our final roster projections and see how this roster is going to shake out. So thanks everyone for listening. We'll talk to you next week.